Hi everyone, welcome to Secure Your APIs with Apache APISIX video tutorial. My name is Bobur. I am a developer advocate. In this walkthrough, we are going to have a look at some Apache APISIX built-in plugins, and we will learn how to secure the APIs and how to configure these plugins and use them. So let's get started. API security basically is a term referring to practices and products that prevent the malicious attacks on application program interface like APIs, because APIs have become a key to programming web-based interactions as they have become a target for malicious attacks. As a result, the basic authentication requiring only usernames and passwords in the past has been replaced with various forms of security tokens, such as used by multi-factor authentication, MFA. In our modern era, API security has become increasingly important, and many hardening techniques are available nowadays, like TLS encryption, API firewalls, validating incoming request data, or auditing, logging, continuously monitoring, IP restriction, and many others. An API gateway can handle all those mentioned above cross-cutting concerns when it comes to security. API gateway is an essential component of API management solution. It's a key to security that protects all the underlying data, like a gatekeeper checking authentication and authorization or the managing traffic. As it is a thin layer between your user clients and your upstream services, API Gateway is further extended with countless built-in plugins to handle, let's say, authentication, security, authorization, or the monitoring. So, how does an APISIX gateway secure your APIs? API security at APISIX is the highest priority, as it serves as an inline proxy, a point of control over all your APIs. First of all, it provides authentication, verifies the identity associated with API requests through the credentials, token validation, as well as other authentication methods. You can check available authentication plugins on the official website, and also it provides authorization, which is able to determine which traffic is authorized to pass through the API to backend services. And there is another traffic control, and APISIX can control the traffic flowing through the APIs using rate limiting and throttling and many other techniques. There are traffic control plugins available for that purposes. And the last one is monitoring, or we would say observability. You can observe your APIs by using three different kind of plugins like loggers, metrics, and tracers. For example, you can log all the APISIX responses and requests coming to your APIs and send these logs to the HTTP server or send it to Kafka cluster. Also, you can integrate with Google Cloud logging. From the other side, you can also see the metrics with integration of Prometheus plugin, and later on see the graph and Grafana dashboard. With enough theoretical knowledge received up to now, let's go to demonstration session. Today we are going to review three different kind of security plugins that are offered by Apache APISIX, like IP restriction, consumer restriction, and URI blocker. We'll go through each plugin and learn about how to install. About other security plugins, you can have a look at plugins webpage on APISIX official website, and I have a separated video tutorial for how to use authentication plugins or how to manage central authentication with Apache APISIX plugins. For example, the IP restriction plugin is one of the security method to limit IP address of clients who is going to send requests to our APIs. We can allow or deny these API addresses in the provided IP address list. Or for the consumer restriction, we can also restrict to some of our API resources to access for the specific users or services. For the URA blocker plugin, it can intercept user requests and can block the chosen URA resources. Some of the prerequisites for this demo session is make sure that you have installed Apache APISIX. To do so, we can go to perhaps to Apache APISIX documentation and follow the installation guide for Apache APISIX. There are several options that you can install APISIX, but for this demo, I'm using a Docker on my machine, and you can also follow up other way of installing Apache APISIX. It's also preferable if you have a look some of the core concepts of Apache APISIX like route, upstream, and plugin. Let's start with the first security plugin, IP restrictions. Here you can find the information about this IP restriction plugin. As I mentioned earlier, it is able to put some IP addresses of clients that accessing APIs into blacklist or the whitelist. You can also specify what kind of message should be replied to the user or the consumer of your APIs if the IP address not allowed to reach some kind of resources. Let's jump into our favorite terminal and try to run a kernel command. In this demo, we are going to use some kernel commands to test or configure our routes for the APISIX. Let's pass the following command. Basically what we are saying here, as you can see in the kernel command, we are using following the endpoint, means the configuration of Apache APISIX objects like service, upstream, routes is handled via REST API. That's the reason why we are calling this endpoint /APISIX/admin and /routes, meaning that we are managing routes and trying to create our first route. As you can see also in the header, we are sending the API key, because configuration is highly critical feature. We need to authenticate via API key, the admin API. Here we use a default one, but you can also generate your own. It's highly advised and regularly updated this API key. And the next one is we are saying to admin API any URA matching /get in the newly defined route should be redirected to the following upstream. And we are specifying the upstream, the routing algorithm. In our case, upstream reference to the cluster of nodes, which you can balance a lot across these nodes. But in our case, we have simply one node, so we can use any default algorithm, in our case round robin. Below that one, we can see the plugin configuration. Here we can specify the list of plugins or a single plugin configuration. In this plugins object inside the JSON, we are saying using a plugin called IP restriction, and we are trying to whitelist, allow only this random API to have access to this, let's say, backend service that we have. If I go and press enter, APISIX server responds successful response, and next we can try to test if if we try to access our backend service, APISIX shouldn't allow us to do so. I can run the following command to access this URA /get. What happens since we have only single whitelist API, other API should be rejected. I mean API addresses. So here we go. Yes, we got the 403 HTTP status as forbidden, and with a message that our IP address is not in the allowed IP address range or in the IP address list. It's working well. Another security technique is to make corresponding access restriction to API resources for the specific users or services. For that purpose, we can use consumer restrictions plugin. Let's say if unknown user tries to send a request to our API, Apache APISIX will meet them with an error, meaning that the access is not allowed for the given user or consumer. Assume that we have the two users or the consumers of our APIs, let's say with the username Yak 2019 and Yak 2020. We want to give access only to one of them, and to do so, let's create the two consumers and enable after that the consumer restriction plugin for our let's say route. I open again my command line terminal and bring the following kernel command to create my first the consumer with just default credentials, like we are using basic authentication plugin to check the authentication. But in this case, you can use also other authentication plugins like a JWT for security. So I will create my first user, and the following way it is successful, and we have our first consumer of our, let's say, services. And next, let's create a second consumer. With similar way, I can just bring the following command, but I will just update the username to the 2020. So here we go. We have now two consumers. The next step is to enable consumer restriction plugin to restrict the access for the user number one. To do so, I will bring another kernel command. As we did for the IP restriction, we need to request the admin REST API with a routes configuration by enabling basic authentication by default and enabling consumer restriction. And we are whitelisting only our first consumer. And of course, we are using the upstream that we created in previous step when we test and validate our IP restriction plugin. So here we go. Press enter. Now is all good. The next step, we can verify now by accessing our get URI if the consumer Yak1 can request API resources with provided credentials. I need this command. I'm sending basic authentication in the request of kernel command, and I'm saying it's the first user credentials, and press enter. So now, as you can see, the output is okay because we are allowing the Yak 2019 to access our API. But if we try to do the same request, but with different credentials, user credentials of second consumer, we should get the following error, meaning that the access is forbidden. Of course, you can also customize this error message when we are restricting the access to any user. If you go to the plugin documentation, there are some attributes for the consumer restriction plugin that can be specified, like we used whitelist, but you can also use a blacklist attribute, or we have this following reject code and rejected message, the custom properties. Like in our case, we can use rejected message if we would like to define our custom message. For the consumer restriction, that's all. Next and the last plugin demo for today is URI blocker. It's very simple and straightforward to use. It simply blocks the access to listed URIs. Let's say URI resources. Maybe you have some static files that can be blocked from let's say external calls. You can apply this URI blocker plugin with a couple of commands. With a similar way we did for IP restriction and consumer restriction plugins, we need to run the following kernel command and to say this for this given route we need to block the access to the following the resources. Let's jump into the terminal and try to experiment this case. I will just put following curl command by saying if the request matches any kind of slash blocked slash rules, and if we have specified following static files is not allowed to be accessed, we can show in the URA blocker plugin of configuration as it's shown here. And the same case we are using simply the upstream service. And if I run this command, now API6 admin received the request, and if we try to the next to validate if these following resources are accessible by the API call, we should get the forbidden error. To test this basic scenario, I need to run the following command by saying that we are trying to hit this URA with a given path, and we are trying to access root.exe static file. In that case, we should get forbidden error because in the above step we mentioned that the root.exe file should be in the blocked rules for the URA blocker plugins. So that's why here we are not allowed to access this URA path. As you can see, it is very simple to enable and configure these plugins. In case if you have similar stuff to do separately without API Gateway, it can be a little time consuming, but you can also have a look other some advanced security plugins as listed here in the Apache APISIX documentation.